right, everyone. Thanks for attending today. We really appreciate it. So I have the pleasure of introducing Zack Glick here from Zatik Security. So he's the founder and CTO of Zatik, and he's going to talk to us today about some tabletop games and exercises and some really fun Infosec games. So if you're interested in getting into information security and have a background in video or tabletop games, this is the talk for you. Right. There are a number of concepts you could take from your background to apply to the industry. Come roll some D20s. You got those in? Explore some backdoors and breaches, hack through some corporate firewalls and Netrunner, or communicate in secret via Cryptomancer. So let's give a warm welcome.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. So normally a security talk starts off with a disclaimer slide, right? That, you know, the opinions expressed here are just mine, they're just my opinion, yada, yada. Let's get to the real disclaimers when we're talking about gaming. So, most importantly, Xbox fan. I've had an Xbox since launch. I have a gamer tag from when Ghost Recon, the first one, came out on the first Xbox. I've never owned a PlayStation. Your controller is too small. Why do you have an X button instead of an A button? It makes no sense. Get out of here. Thank you. This one's not going to be as helpful. I bought my last gaming PC fully assembled from Dell. So I'm losing some gamer cred already, but, look, it's all about disclosure and transparency. I am a recovering League of Legends player. I promise not to be toxic in this room. I'm still on a chat restriction, so that's why this is a verbal talk, not a written one. Like they mentioned in the intro, we started up a business, and so the last game that I've really put some time in on is Troll Patrol on iOS. It is a great match 3 puzzle quest style game with no in-app purchases. Highly recommended if you don't have a lot of time to play video games anymore. You might think, like, it'll never happen to you. Don't worry, Infosec will not turn you away from the gaming world. It's starting a business that will do it. So please still get into the security industry. You can still play your video games. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 5 things today. And these are things that, as somebody in the industry, you're going to use on a daily basis or in any job that you take, regardless of offensive, defensive. And if you're already a video game player or you like playing board games or tabletop games, you're already familiar with these, and I'm going to walk you through them. The games that we're going to talk about today are League of Legends, because obviously better than Dota, sorry, better than Heroes of the Storm. I will dodge tomatoes as they're thrown at me. We're going to talk about a InfoSec-specific game called Backdoors and Breaches, which is an incident response simulator. We're going to talk about defense in depth with the living card game Netrunner, which is a super fun one. We're going to talk about two-factor authentication with Steam and Epic Games. And we're going to end hacking our way through the Shardnet in Cryptomancer, a hacking tabletop role-playing game. So if you've played D&D, let's talk about information security in them. So threat modeling. We're going to talk about this through the lens of one of the greatest games of all time, / worst games of all time, / addicting thing of all time. They have this whole $500 skin scandal. It's really bad. League of Legends. If you haven't played it before, probably it's way too late. But what are we doing here? So this is the mini map of the game. It's pretty straightforward. You start at one of the corners. You're trying to get to the other corner. You're trying to get through these 9 towers that are between you and the other side. And all you have to know to get to the other side is the 120 plus champions of the game, all their abilities, all their cooldowns, the itemization, the current metagame, map strategy, last hitting, jungle pathing, and of course, you can't see anything. So this is really why we're talking about League of Legends. League of Legends is a game about information. So before, this is the overview of the entire map. When you're actually playing the game, you can only see what your team can see. And very much like in information security, you can only make decisions about what you know based off of the information that you have. And so I'm going to zoom in on a specific part of the map, this bottom lane at the bottom right. And our goal as the blue team is we want to push our team's line forward and take out this first red tower. Now, when we talk about threat modeling and information security, there are just a few words that I'm going to use, so I just want to run through them if folks aren't familiar with them. So threat is a potential danger. A vulnerability is something that could allow that potential danger to happen, and the risk is the likelihood of those things coming together to make you have a bad day. And so what is our threat in this scenario? Well, we're playing a video game, so we could be attacked by the other side of the team, or the team on the other side of the map. We could piss off our own teammates and cause some discord on the team if we make a mistake. Now, the vulnerability, what could actually go wrong? Well, we are alone. We're one of 5 players on the team. There are 5 players on the other team. And so since we can only see ourselves on the map currently, can't see any of the other opponents, there could be 0 people hiding and waiting for us. There could be 5 people waiting for us. We just don't know. The likelihood is, what's our probability that this is going to happen? And so since we lack the information, or we're playing in this fog of war, we have to assume that the likelihood is pretty high. And so what we're working through in threat modeling, there are a ton of different threat modeling options out there when you get into the industry. So there's things like the kill chain, which is more of an offensive way to talk about a specific intrusion. There's Stride, which is an application security modeling tool developed by Microsoft initially. There are data flow diagrams. There are attack trees. All these are valuable, but Adam Shostak, came up with these 4 questions. If you're doing some generic threat modeling, if you're playing a game and you're like, I want to be a little more formal in my reasoning, you can just ask yourself, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we doing? And how do we know we did a good job? And so Adam Shostak, if you just Google for Shostak 4 questions, will not be about the Passover Seder. These 4 will come up. So let's return to our bottom lane example here. So what are we trying to do? Right? We said we're trying to work forward and get through this tower. What can go wrong? So we overextend, we give up a kill, lets the other team rotate and take this dragon. Our team gets really mad at us. It's early in the game. Now we've got 25 minutes of angry strangers on the internet. So what are we going to do to try to avoid that scenario? Obviously, the answer is get good, scrub. That is clearly the answer. We're going to try and be a little more formal and use some information. So in League of Legends, you can do a number of different things. You can wait and see if somebody else shows up, right? Because time is a valuable resource in the game. So if you look at the mini-map and all of a sudden there are 3 players on the other team up at the top of the map, now you know that at most there could only be 2 players on the other team. You could put a ward down, which is a little trinket that you can put out that it can see on your behalf. You could send in another member of your team to get killed, and then it won't be your fault if there's a mistake. I highly recommend that one. And then a very cool thing about video games is that they are easy to measure. So when you're in the information security industry, you're like, did that work? Did that not work? We don't know. When you're playing a video game, and League of Legends is one of these games that has like a replay feature. So you can actually watch your game back and see, all right, I was in this scenario. I made this decision. Did I get lucky or did I make the right decision? And so that's a super useful part. It's why this 4th question of did we do a good job is super helpful. And so when we talk about this 3rd question of what did we do, again, we work through these 3 terms that we use all the time in information security. So when you have a risk, you have 3 choices. You can transfer it, you can mitigate it, or you can accept it. And if you don't pick one of the first 2, you've picked the 3rd one by default. And picking the 3rd one by default is your worst case scenario. So there are some times when risk acceptance is perfectly valid. So in League of Legends, you can look at the scoreboard anytime and see who's alive and who's dead. So in this scenario, there are 4 players dead on the other team. So at best, it could be a one-on-one scenario, right? So we took that all possible probability of there could be 5 people. We used 1 additional piece of information, and now we know at most it can be a one-on-one. Also, we know that the 1 character that's still alive has died 6 times and only has 2 kills. So they are bad at the game. We're much better than them. We can take them one-on-one. Sometimes, though, it doesn't work. And for anyone who played this game, you can ping your teammates to let them know things. And this ping is supposed to mean, hey, somebody's missing up here, pay attention. Culturally, what it means when it's this many right over your dead body is you have made a mistake. You are bad. Uninstall the game. In real information security, we always just move on to the next one, right? We're a blameless retrospective culture. That's the type of team you want to build when you're building one. League of Legends does not have that methodology, and so let's move on from League of Legends. It is a silly place. So incident response. The information security industry is split into offense, defense, governance, risk, and compliance, and tooling and infrastructure, in my opinion. Incident response, if you're working on the blue team, the defensive side, it's a huge part of your day. I think it's one of the cooler PvP games that you can legally play, because it is one of the few times in your life that you are actively competing against another person. If there is a hostile person on your network, it is not an AI, it is not a rogue something, it is somebody who has a goal. They could be criminal, they could be a government intruder, they could just be doing it for fun, whatever. But you are playing a PvP game when you're playing incident response. It is a reason why some people get hooked on that part of the industry. I did that job for 4 years as a frontline incident responder, and then worked in a support role for 2 years. I worked at Amazon and on the AWS side, and my first day on call was Heartbleed. My last week there was Log4j. So put me in your on-call rotation. I am a great good luck charm. And so Backdoors and Breaches is a card game that's been designed to help you run what's called a tabletop exercise. So real incidents are A, expensive, B, scary, C, risky, and D, can put your company out of business. And a tabletop exercise lets you practice a real-world scenario without having to worry about all those bad consequences. It's made by a company called Black Hills Information Security. This is a great company. They also do a ton of great work for the community. So if you're just getting started in the industry and you're interested, they run a lot of called pay what you can trainings. And so if you can't pay anything, they're available for free. They have a great blog. I think they have a podcast. Highly recommended. And so Backdoors and Breaches, your goal is like Clue. So if anybody played Clue, the board game, right, you're trying to figure out who done it, where, and with what. In Backdoors and Breaches, you're trying to figure out these 4 things of an incident. And just like in a real-world scenario, these are really the 4 things that help you understand what's happening in an incident. So initial compromise, how'd they get in? Pivot and escalate. They got in somewhere, but it's not a useful point. How did they get somewhere good? And how did they get the privileges to do it? Persistence, how did they stick around, right? You might have found them once, but how do they come back? And then C2 stands for command and control. And so C2 and exfiltration means how did they control their assets on your network? And how did they get the stuff that they stole out of your network? And so you'll have a game master when you're playing Backdoors and Breaches. They assemble this 4-card hand that comes in the deck. One of the things I really like about this as a game tool, as a training aid, is they list all of the URLs. They cite their sources at the bottom of the card. So if you're like, oh wow, that was a super useful procedure we don't have that in our real world, how would we implement it? The sources are right on the card. And you'll see that each one of these cards has a detection listed. And since this is a game, right, we get in this sort of rock, paper, scissors scenario of if you're trying to figure this out, if I used X procedure and succeeded at it, the GM will reveal the card. Your goal is to reveal within 10 rounds what is this hand, and if you do, you win, and if you lose, you launch a retrospective. As the defending team, you get a hand of these procedure cards. And so these are procedures that you have as a team to help secure your assets. And so these are the counterpoints to those detection rules on the attacking cards. When you're at a company, there are procedures that you use all the time. And so they're things that you're familiar with, you know how to do, all your staff are trained. It's not just one person who, Jill's on vacation, so we actually don't know how to do this. Uh-oh. And so these get a bonus in the game, get a +3 to your roll when you use an established procedure, but you can still use a procedure. You roll a d20, and if you get a 10 or greater, the procedure has succeeded, and if it maps to one of the controls that you figured, or one of the 4 parts of the attacking hand, the GM will reveal them. If you roll a natural 1 or a natural 20, bad things can happen. So when you're working on an incident, weird stuff can come up. One of your incident responders can have a baby. They can get sick. They can get COVID. A lawyer could want a briefing. The executives could want a briefing, which is even worse. Another incident could happen. And so these injects are a way to throw some randomness into the game. And as a GM, if you're running it for your team, one of the best ones that you can do is if there's one person who's dominating the conversation and you want to pull more people in, you can just play and inject and say, you have to go give the executives a briefing. And that person has to sit out for a few rounds, right, to let the rest of the team practice. And so injects are this great way of throwing a little bit of chaos into the process. Tabletop exercises, they take a little bit of planning, right, because you're playing pretend with your coworkers, which is always fun. But you're not doing your real job, right, because you're not actually stopping a real incident. You're not pushing tickets. You're not updating systems. If you've got a small team, time is a resource just like in League of Legends. It's a resource in the real world. So maybe you're not going to get to do this every week, but if you're in an organization and you're not doing tabletops, grabbing a copy of Backdoors and Breaches I think is like $10. There's an online version if you're a distributed team, so you can play it over Zoom. Take some time, think about like how this could be useful for your team, and you can help make this justification to your leadership. The biggest one is that it helps you identify gaps before you actually have the problem. So if you realize, we failed to detect persistence because they were in our cloud environment, and we don't actually have a cloud posture management tool, and so we're not evaluating how many IAM users are in our cloud. All right, well, we failed with some cards, but like doesn't matter. Right? But now you can go to leadership and say, look, we've done an exercise. We understand we have this problem. We want to invest in the next 6 weeks and figure out a way to close this gap. So it gives you a little bit of data to go to your leadership and justify making these investments. It gives you a chance to try out new things. So if your team doesn't know that you rolled out a new endpoint tool, or doesn't know that there's a new log source, and you're playing the GM and you know that the new tool should have revealed, that there was C2 via TLS. And you're like, well, now we got a tool, we're cracking that stuff. Or we should be detecting malicious domains because we just bought X vendor. It allows you as a manager to say, my team's not familiar with the new thing that came out. We're not aware of our new capabilities. And it also helps you train your new staff, both from what does our team do, how do we operate, but bringing them in and letting them make calls. My entrance to the information security world came because somebody replied to a Reddit direct message. I owe my entire career to the RNetSec Q3 hiring thread in 2013. Thank you, David Albernaz, if you're out there. And he brought me into a team that let me make mistakes and had this blameless culture, helped me learn, helped me grow. And so when you're building that culture as a team, you want your juniors in there. And Tabletop is a great way for them to take the lead as an incident commander. Right? When you're commanding an incident, if you've all been on an airplane, you've heard the pilot voice, right? That low, monotone, everything's fine. You're 20,000 feet in the air and the ground is shaking. That could be bad. But this calm person comes over the line and says, we're going to find some smooth air, folks. Don't worry about it. Your job as an incident commander is to remain calm. You can do a lot of other stuff, but your job is to remain calm. This is another day at the farm. Everyone else, it could be their first time in an incident. They could be worried that the Russians are on the network, the Chinese are behind every router, and Anonymous is in our network traffic. It's just another day at the office for you. And this lets you feel that adrenaline, clamp it down, and sort of really understand what you bring to an incident as a commander is leadership. And it's a super fun way to practice. The next topic I want to talk about is defense in depth. And so there's a model that you'll probably see in Infosec called the Swiss cheese model. I'm seeing a couple of shaking heads yes. I'm seeing a couple of shaking heads no. So this is a model that got introduced at the University of Manchester in the 90s. And it basically is a way of saying, well, if you have a layer, no layer of protection or decision-making is going to be perfect. There's going to be ways things fall through the cracks. But if you have a second layer behind that, and the holes don't line up directly, well, even if something gets through layer 1, it might get stopped at layer 2. And even if it gets through a hole at layer 1 and layer 2 because they happen to line up together, you still have layer 3 behind you. And so in information security, this is an application security application version of this. So we're building a web application, and we want to make sure that it's not going to get hacked. This stuff comes from the OWASP AppSec cheat sheet. If you're not familiar with OWASP, it's a super great resource. They have a ton of these so-called cheat sheets that as you're building apps, rolling out products, they can help you secure different things. So highly recommend OWASP. And so the first thing they recommend is input sanitization, right? So this protects you from injection-style vulnerabilities, which are still plaguing web apps to this day. look at any CVE from the last week. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure there was an injection vulnerability in there. And let's say you use libraries that have injection protections in them, but for whatever reason they fail, or a developer forgets to use them and uses an unsafe method. Well, if you build your product with a memory-safe language, so memory-safe languages handle memory management for you. They help mitigate against buffer overflows. CISA, which is a U.S. government agency focused on cybersecurity defense, is recommending companies come up with a memory-safe roadmap. And so if you're working in a memory-safe language, yes, they have input sanitization, but they don't have the ability to buffer overflow you to get onto the device. So let's say you forgot to do input sanitization, you're still using an old-style C app, it was running as an administrator on the product, or it's running as a basic user on your server, but at least your operating system is patched. So that way they can't use a CVE from 5 years ago to go from basic user to root level. And so you stack these layers of defense because you're never quite sure that every control will be perfect. A 0-day can always pop out and get you. And so, again, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this through the realm of Netrunner. So Netrunner, it's a super fun game. It's called a living card game. So if you've heard of games like Magic, right, where you buy boosters and hope that the cards you want are there, a living card game is the opposite of that. You buy a set, you're guaranteed to have 3 of every copy, and so you can just build decks. Super fun. It was originally released by Fantasy Flight Games. They no longer print it, but there is a community-supported version from Null Signal Games that you can still buy, so you don't have to pay, inflated out-of-print prices. It's super fun. It is an asymmetric card game, which is super fun, right? It's what we play for. You play either as the runner, a hacker trying to break into various large corporations. There are 3 hacker factions that you can play: the criminals, the anarchs, and the shapers. There are 4 giant megacorps that you can play: NBN, which is your information control-y people; Gintechie, which are your cool biohackers that have traps; Haas Biroid, which are cool androids; and then Wayland, which is just the Wayland-Yutani Corporation from Aliens, but they don't include the word Yutani, so they can't be sued. In the game, the Corp are trying to score agendas. And the runners are also trying to score agendas. But the hilarious thing is the runner does not get to bring any agendas to the game. The only way that they can get agendas is by breaking into the corporation and stealing them from them. And so the corporation has to set up their board like this. So they have 4 different ways that they can be attacked: the discard pile, their deck, or their hand. And then they have to deploy their agendas into these remote servers and leave them out for a certain number of turns. Right? So if you leave something out, it's worth more points, but it gives more chance for the runner to score. They protect these servers and their hand and their discard pile and their deck by ice. And so ice, if you've never read any of like Neuromancer or anything like in the William Gibson cyberpunk era, it sort of imagines before Metaverse was a headset that you bought from a company called Meta that used to be called Facebook. The Metaverse was just this sort of concept of cybersecurity. You're flying through as a person. You're seeing 3D walls of firewalls shoot up in front of you. And so William Gibson calls them ice, and so you'll see that term in a lot of cyberpunk stuff. It's super cool. Highly recommend Neuromancer. It's a book on paper or ebook or audiobook, depending on your preference. You might be like, wow, this seems really derivative. And that's because everything that you were thinking of stole it from Netrunner, or from Neuromancer in the first place. Unlike in real life, in Netrunner, the runner's brain is directly connected to their computer. So there's a second way for the Corp to win, which is they can just kill the runner. So instead of scoring agendas, they can put something out in a remote server and leave it there and hope that the runner goes for a run. But it turns out it's a gigantic brain virus that's going to melt the runner's brain. And so if you can flatline the runner, meaning force them to discard a card from their hand that they cannot, you have won as the Corp. Both are equally valid. One is cooler than the other. And so the game breaks down ice into these 3 different categories, right? This is where we get into a little bit of, it's more of a game than real life. There are 3 types of ice: barrier, sentry, and code gate. And there are 3 types of breakers. So the runner deck, it doesn't have any agendas. It's full of programs. So they are building their cyber deck to play this game. So they're looking for their programs. They're looking for cool underworld contacts. They're dumpster diving to go and grab different documents to learn information from the corp. And they play this rock, paper, scissors game of the corp's ice is face down. They don't know what they're going to go find. And so they have to prepare their cyber deck and their economy to be able to succeed on a run. If they run into a barrier, they need a fractor to break it. If they run into a sentry ice, they need a killer. And if they run into a code gate, they need a decoder. It's a super fun game. I've got decks with me, so if people want to come out and play a game, I wore a red shirt so I'm easy to find. Not so that I will die on an away mission in Star Trek. It has checks on it. It's not solid red. I'm safe. But if you want to play a game, I've got a copy of it. Super fun. There are a ton of expansions. There's people that play online. But super fun game. Highly recommend it. And unlike the real world, you get to kill the hackers that are attacking your network if you're a blue teamer, which is kind of cool. I want to talk about two-factor auth. If you take one thing away, if you're not in the security industry and you're interested in getting into it, this is a quote that a U.S. senator said to a CEO 2 weeks ago. If you've heard of the Change Healthcare breach, this was about 2/3 of the ability to service electronic prescriptions in the U.S. were impacted by the Change Healthcare breach. And they did not build for defense in depth. They had a box on the edge of their network with a password, with no multi-factor auth, that allowed a ransomware actor to get in and take down this entire healthcare company. Multi-factor auth is becoming table stakes. If you're building an application, if you're building a company, if you're currently a defender at a company and you don't have a multi-factor strategy, we'll talk after this, but like it is becoming table stakes. Password stealers, reused passwords, password sprays, all these things are becoming super common from attackers. And one thing that we're seeing is kids learning this through video games. So if you have Steam, Epic Games, an Xbox account because you're cool, a PlayStation account because you have weird shaped hands, I don't know, all these accounts can have MFA on them. Put them on there. If you have kids who are buying digital goods like skins, digital games, make sure that they have MFA on their account. This does not mean you need to buy them a cell phone so they can have MFA. You can use your phone because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But these digital app accounts are being stolen, being resold, bullying at school, all that stuff. Two-factor auth if you've got a gaming account, super important. A couple of Infosec things. So some MFA is better than no MFA. Not all types of multi-factor authentication are the same, right? So you'll see some sites use like what they call magic login. So if you use, not Squarespace, Substack, they don't really want you to log in with a password. They want to give you an email address and then they're going to email you a link. And they're saying, well, they have access to this email account, so therefore we're letting them in. Is it technically multi-factor authentication? Not really, right? Because you just need to know your own email address and have the login. There could be no password on there. But the theory there is like, well, people care a lot more about their email account than their Substack account, so if we let people put a password, they're going to use a bad one, password spraying, yada, yada. Are magic links great? No, but they're better than nothing. SMS, right? So various banks will text you codes and ask you to never share them with anyone, but please type them into this website. SIM swapping, which is the ability for an attacker to steal your phone number, is becoming very common. It's built into a lot of common phishing kits, and there's ability for people will just sit outside cell phone stores in cars, wait for a manager to pick up one of the tablets, run into the store, yank the tablet out of the manager's hands, and now they have a logged-in tablet on the network. They'll just bribe minimum wage employees at cell phone stores or call centers to say, hey, I totally own that phone number. It's reduced the value of SMS as a second factor, but it's still worth it. This is Zach's opinion, but it's still better than nothing. If you can use an app, so TOTP, which is like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, typing in codes is sometimes annoying, but it's better. It's a stronger level. And then U2F, Universal Second Factor, which are like YubiKeys or passkeys, are super valuable. If you're at a company and you don't have an MFA strategy, go play some video games because tomorrow is Sunday. Then when you go to work on Monday, have this discussion with your leadership. It's something you can really focus on. The last thing that we're going to talk about is cryptography. And so because this is 2024, this is another disclaimer slide. We are talking about cryptography, not money in crypto. My co-founder is a cryptographer. He'd be mad if I didn't include this disclosure slide. A cryptographic system gives you a couple of different properties. It can allow for secret communications, and it can allow for verified communications. So in security, we talk about Alice, Bob, and Eve. Alice and Bob want to talk. Eve is evil and wants to talk. Don't ask what happened to C and D. They did not complete their TPS reports, and they were fired. Alice wants to send Bob a message, and they agree on a secret passphrase ahead of time. And so they send the message. Eve, even if she possesses the message, can't read it. And so this is powered through a symmetric cryptography system, meaning that there's a single secret key that's used for both encryption and decryption. The issue we get to in this scenario is how can Alice and Bob exchange their secret passphrase ahead of time? And so the industry has come up with this concept of asymmetric cryptography, where you have a pair of keys, a public and a private key. When Alice wants to send Bob a message, she uses his public key to encrypt a message. And since Bob is the only one who possesses the secret key, he can decrypt the message when he reads it. And it also allows us to perform verification using the inverse of that system. So if Bob wants to make sure that Alice is the one sending him a message, again, Alice has her secret key, Bob has her public key. Alice can sign a message. Now, in this case, the message is not encrypted, right? It's still sent in plain text, so Eve could steal it, but she can't change the contents of the message. Now, this is useful. It's the basis of a ton of stuff in cybersecurity. I ran through it really fast. I'm not going to ask you to explain public and private keys, but it's a thing that you want to build in. And so I think it's much more fun to learn it using magic. And so Cryptomancer is a tabletop role-playing game. It's available on DriveThruRPG. And it is a D&D style world that adds cryptography, information warfare, and internet security to the fantasy world. And I think we can all agree that shard nets are better than the internet, true names are better than private keys, magic phrases are cooler than pre-shared keys, and that orc wizards are scarier than Eve. I am much more worried about Thalanor Nexus Walker stealing my one true name and corrupting my message to my party than Eve stealing a private key. The super cool thing about this game is it's going to introduce these concepts to you in a way that you can remember, where you're not teaching cryptography to your friends. You're not talking about computer hacking with your friends who don't want to talk with you about it. You're just in a cool D&D style world that happens to have this thing called the shard net, where instead of having to go from random city to random city and dealing with an encounter along the way, you can just send messages back and forth. You can use rituals to create a private shard net that is encrypted with your one true name that allows your party to communicate. But there's a focus in the game on hacking and espionage, where you're running networks of agents. You're conducting dead drops that they are signing messages back and forth. As the DM, you're trying to break all these different things so that you can cheat your way, and the party is looking for ways that they can actively exploit the systems that you're building. So if you have a D&D group that you want to talk about hacking and they don't want to, it's a super fun way to introduce it. It is it's available on DriveThruRPG. Super fun game, and I hope that you've enjoyed today. We've talked about a bunch of different security concepts. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Buffalo Open Coffee Club. Pat is laughing at me. This is a group I run in Buffalo. It's a free event every Tuesday, 7:30 to 9 in Seneca 1. It is for folks building businesses in Buffalo. So if you're interested in starting a business, if you run a business, if you're stuck, we do a process called Gives and Asks, which allows you to throw an ask out to the group. We've had asks everything from, does anybody know a landscaping company that can make my storefront look nice, to does anybody know a lawyer that does digital intellectual property work? Buffalo is a town where if the person isn't in the room, they know somebody who can help you, and a warm intro is always better than a cold one. So please join us. All the information is at 716coffee.club, where there are every Tuesday, 7:30 to 9. My name's been Zack Glick. Thank you for coming. We got some time for questions. And Zack at Zatik.io if you have any questions. And I've got Netrunner with me if anyone wants to play a game. Thank you for your time.
All right, any questions in the crowd?
Yes.
I'm happy you brought up the inject cards, because I think I'm the person that's your favorite inject. I read IR analyst and started a rock band instead. But my question is, I'm a little bit further in my career, and I see a lot of value in these games, and I try to get tabletops to run. I try to bring people in these concepts, but of course, like you said, trying to convince your management that spending time playing a game instead of doing your job isn't worthwhile. Do you have any ways of tracking some level of metrics or putting some sort of dollars and cents behind it where you can get that buy-in from those, boards or further up the chain of command?
Yeah, so the question for folks who might not have heard is how do you justify, do you have metrics that you can use to convince your boss that spending some time on a tabletop is worth it? I think it's good, right? So when you're dealing with senior leadership, they don't care about tech, they don't care about how cool it is, they care about risk, and they care about dollars and cents. This number is from last DBIR, so the Verizon DBIR is a great sort of industry-level document. You can just read it as a PDF. You don't have to give them your email address. The form is very confusing, but you can read the PDF for free. Don't give them your email address. The average downtime from a ransomware incident was 21 days. And so that's if you do everything right. And so if you're talking to senior leadership, they probably know how much revenue they make per day. So multiply that by 21, and that's what it on average could cost them in a response. And so you're like, look, we can game out this strategy and see how we could handle, do we have the ability to roll from our backups? Do we have the ability to detect a hostile, an anomalous behavior on our network? This costs us time, it doesn't cost us money. And so it's really speaking to them in the language that they understand. For folks who don't know, at Buff State, the term brainstorming was invented in Buffalo, which I think is super cool. And there's a tool that they use in that called the polarity model. I have a blog post coming out on this in a couple weeks, but it's a way of mapping your line of thinking where you're only thinking of the positives of why we should do this. The person you're speaking to doesn't know about the positives, they only know about the negatives. And so a polarity model helps you think about preparing your communication strategy in a way that reflects how the other person's going to hear it, not how you're trying to say it. So really speak to those senior leaders in the manner that they're used to, which is risk and money, because that's how you're going to justify it, even though it's super fun and cool. And then maybe they can come play. Yes.
So I just want to inject one thing. So no pun intended, not inject.
Yeah. If people know me, it's very much intended.
Some of BSides, and so I've had some of these challenges as well. And so when we talk about incident response, we tend to focus on the technical pieces of an incident, and the response and the recovery of that. But there's another part, right? And that is the senior management. And so when you find yourself in an incident, there is a team of people that's involved. And that team includes things like senior executives, communications, HR, and others. And when you do an incident response, when you do a tabletop, there's really two flavors, right? There's the technical piece, testing people's ability to do the detection and the response and the recovery work, yes. But then there's the management side of it. So how does the company manage this incident at a higher level? And so bringing those folks to the table and exposing them to these concepts and having them go through the training is invaluable. Because when you think about when it hits the fan, and it will hit the fan, the first thing to skyrocket are emotions.
Yeah.
And so having people that have been through this, who understand that there is a path through it and they understand what their roles and responsibilities are, helps to tamp down those emotions and keep people focused on task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that pilot voice is key. If you've never watched anything about Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier, every pilot you've ever heard is doing a Chuck Yeager impression. Right? This guy is going faster and faster and faster. The X1 is shaking, and he is cool on the radio. He's not yelling, he's not screaming, he's not worried. He is in control of that vehicle. And that calm from the pilot, it radiates calm. And so that practice is key. Okay, yeah.
Question for you. What boxes or kind of like base level information did you need to have where you felt comfortable going from an employee to starting your own business?
So part of it was the community that I was a part of. So Coffee Club has been, a great resource, seeing other people build businesses. We're working with an amazing group called Cooperation Buffalo. We're an employee-owned cooperative, and so they help those types of businesses get off the ground. At UB, there's a thing called, if you're at UB, there's a place called the Collab. Hadar Boren and her crew run it. An amazing, just sort of running through tools like the business model canvas, which is a tool that you sort of use to say, like, does this business idea make sense? Having an amazing co-founder, Kimberly Price, who's my co-founder, is here from Seattle. She's actually speaking at the exact same time, which is sort of annoying, but having somebody like that who I've worked with before, right? When you start a business with someone, you're business married together. So, like, can you work with the person? And really just giving it a go. And then also private equity firm buying the company that you're working at and not wanting to work for a private equity firm, so deciding to quit your job was also helpful. Family support, irrational belief that it could probably work, but happy to talk later as well. Find that community, find those mentors. Are you based out of Buffalo?
Yeah.
So Launch New York is another great organization that serves the 6 Western New York counties. And they have what are called entrepreneurs in residence. So for you, they are free. They are paid, which is great. And they sort of help you develop a business. And then the Small Business Administration through the SCORE program. They have people. So the R in SCORE used to stand for retirees, but it does not anymore. They're very serious about that. But there are people who are retired who used to work in business but still want to help. And they provide free mentoring services as well. So SCORE, SBA, Niagara, something, it'll pop up. But happy to chat after as well. Cool. Thank you so much for your time. If you want to play a game of Netrunner, I got some cards. I'll be around the rest of the day. Thanks for coming to BSides Buffalo.